Welcome to the debate. We are returning today to a really compelling piece of literature, the story of Carmen. We're going to dive deep into its central tragedy, looking at the forces that seem to dictate the fate of Don Jose and Carmen herself. So our central question is this. Is the destructive, fatal relationship between Don Jose and Carmen primarily determined by these seemingly immutable cultural and racial traits ascribed to gypsies, the Calles, as the text calls them, and the Payos, the outsiders? Or is this tragedy rooted more fundamentally in, the chaotic forces of individual passion, specific betrayals, and free will? I'll be arguing that the text fundamentally posits a kind of cultural and racial determinism, which makes the ending, sadly, inevitable because of these incompatible social codes.
Right, and I come at it from, a slightly different angle. While the source material, particularly the author's own kind of ethnographic framing, definitely provides that rich cultural context, no denying that, I'd argue that reducing these devastating events, the desertion, the murders, the betrayals, to just cultural inevitability or racial destiny, it almost strips the characters of their very specific, very intense, and frankly, self-destructive agency. That's what really defines their narrative drive for me. So I believe individual passion and a series of very willful choices are the real architects here.
While the evidence for determinism isn't just implied, it's explicit, it's structured right into the text. The author really takes great pains to present this established framework, especially through that detailed ethnographic analysis. I mean, consider chapter I, right? It shifts focus entirely from the story to define the gypsy race, the Calles, and their specific societal laws. These notes explicitly lay out traits like cunning, a reliance on their unique language, Chipicali, specifically to exclude and, deceive outsiders, and crucially, a fidelity that's reserved only for their own kind. Carmen's entire relationship with Don Jose is almost a perfect demonstration of this framework that's been set up.
She consistently views Jose, and the narrator too, as payalos, outsiders, people to be manipulated, exploited. Her ultimate loyalty, despite Jose's absolute devotion, it's never truly to him. It's shown to be reserved entirely for her recognized gypsy husband, Jerome Garcia El Tuerto. She masterminds his escape from prison according to the explicit law of the Calles. And then her final chilling statement right before her death, it's the ultimate summary of this overriding identity. A Calles she was born and a Calles she'll die. She's choosing her racial freedom, her cultural independence over any personal bond to the outsider. It signals that her identity was always fundamentally the determining factor.
Okay, that's a compelling argument, definitely structurally sound, and it does lean heavily on the author's kind of academic framing. But I would frame the narrative engine itself differently. Because if fate were purely deterministic, just following a script, the narrative wouldn't have the shock, the sheer volatility that we actually see, right? The engine of the story for me is driven specifically by Don Jose's ruinous, intensely personal passion, a destructive force that's really unique to him. His fall isn't just a generalized consequence of two cultures colliding. It's a profound deviation from his initial identity as this disciplined, proud Navarrese Hidalgo, denoting his noble background and an exemplary soldier. His descent kicks off with something incredibly personalized, almost insignificant. His emotional reaction to just picking up that acacia blossom Carmen flips at him. That's an intimate, private moment of, foolishness that really triggers his obsession. And following that, he makes a critical, willful choice. He purposefully helps her escape, which directly leads to him losing his rank. That's a choice, a direct defiance of his soldier's code of honor. And furthermore, Carmen's own actions, they're often just purely chaotic, motivated by caprice or pleasure, not some rigid cultural duty. The text gives us these visceral examples of her individual volatility. Remember when she smashes the old woman's plate just to use the shards as castanets? Or throwing sugar plums into a water jar to make sherbet? These feel like acts of pure, explosive, individual caprice that go way beyond just serving some broad, calculated racial stereotype.
Okay, let's address Don Jose's fall then, through this lens of predestination versus choice. You point to his internal folly, his immediate choices, and fair enough. But I'd suggest that the moment he became entangled with Carmen, the choice itself became something of an illusion because the outcome was essentially foretold by cultural law. Jose himself, in his own telling of the story, he acknowledges his ruin was linked to this outside destructive force, the gypsy woman. His fate wasn't sealed by picking up a flower, specifically, but by the fundamental cultural incompatibility that Carmen herself spells out using gypsy wisdom.
Okay.
She tells them quite clearly, the dog and the wolf can't agree for long. Now, that proverb establishes the gypsy-payo conflict as inherent, systemic, predictive even. She even warns him he would marry a widow with wooden legs, a clear reference to the gallows, foretelling his execution almost from the moment they meet. Jose was an outsider, a payo, and their relationship was inherently doomed by this deep, systemic cultural divide. His actions, therefore, they just become the mechanism, the means through which this preordained tragic outcome is, well, executed.
That's a striking reading of those prophecies, I grant you, but it seems to overlook the sheer volume of personal, voluntary criminal acts Jose commits. Predictable in a broad sense? Maybe. But the specific path to the gallows was entirely paved by his own free will, not some inescapable cultural route dictated for him. Jose wasn't forced to act by destiny. He made crucial, illegal choices that broke both the law and his society's code of honor. He chose to desert his post, consciously ignoring multiple warnings he received.
Right, but those choices were triggered by her.
And crucially, he chose to murder the lieutenant in a jealous rage. That's an act of singular, irrational, deeply human passion. If his path were simply predetermined by some gypsy code he supposedly adopted, why the profound moral struggle afterwards? He tells us he cried hot tears right after the murder. Those hot tears, they demonstrate an individual moral reckoning, a struggle against his own nature and conscience, not simply the dutiful following of a tragic script written by cultural determinism.
I concede the tears indicate struggle, absolutely. But the struggle occurs precisely because he's trying to adopt a worldview that is fundamentally alien, antithetical to his own Hidalgo background. He's spiritually, morally incompatible with the world he's chosen to enter. The tragedy is that he tries to cross that boundary. And this structural incompatibility is, I think, proven when we look at Carmen's behavior, particularly her fidelity, or maybe lack thereof in relation to her Rome, Gracia.
Okay.
If individual caprice just ruled everything, then her actions regarding Garcia El Tuerto don't make a whole lot of sense. Her loyalty to Garcia, I'd argue, is the clearest evidence we have of gypsy cultural fidelity overriding any romantic or emotional attachment to Jose. She risks everything, including manipulating Jose into committing crimes to get Garcia out of the presidio at Tarifa. She uses Jose while El Tuerto is jailed, fine, but the moment Garcia returns, she treats Jose with contempt, prioritizing the recognized gypsy marriage bond over Jose's huge emotional investment. This upholds that central tenet of the Calixas community. Solidarity and loyalty within the race must trump the payo outsider.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that she's adhering strictly to the Calis law of fidelity there. I see her exhibiting profound disloyalty, even her own supposed kind, when her personal situation or, her immediate calculation demands it. We just cannot overlook the fact that she actively facilitates Garcia El Tuerto's death. She doesn't just treat Jose with scorn, she literally sets the stage for Garcia's murder by deliberately putting Jose in a position of conflict with him.
But isn't that still manipulation within their code?
Recall the detail where she explicitly tells Jose, let El Tuerto come up in front of you. That calculated move, it's a betrayal of her legal rom for her current lover, or perhaps manipulated pawn. It shows that individual emotional calculation, manipulation, and frankly, the pragmatic need for survival absolutely trump the generalized Calais law she invokes only when it suits her immediate purpose. If she truly valued Garcia's status as her rom above all else,
above Jose. She would never have put him in mortal danger like that, regardless of her feelings or lack thereof for Jose. Her agency, her specific desire perhaps to be free of El Tuerto and keep using Jose, it overwrites any generalized cultural rule you point to.
That might be manipulation, yes, but the structure of that manipulation, I'd argue, is continually anchored within a specific gypsy view of morality or perhaps amorality, especially when dealing with outsiders, with payelos. The text establishes a very clear Kali's worldview where theft and deception of payelos are not just acceptable, they're almost expected. Remember the proverb, the dog that runs never starves? We see this constantly. Her theft of the narrator's watch, her deceptive little business charging the Spanish lady for a fake charm. Don Jose, once he's fallen, he simply adopts his criminal trade because it aligns perfectly with the amoral gypsy worldview that Carmen embodies and propagates. He becomes a Galo brigand because that's the social destiny required to exist with Carmen. He accepts the deterministic path laid out by the culture she represents.
But does he fully adopt it? I don't think so. He remains a conflicted man, constantly demonstrating that his individual moral compass is still operating, maybe sputtering, but operating beneath the criminal facade. He maintains these stubborn remnants of his old integrity. If he were fully integrated into the Callous Criminal Code, he wouldn't struggle so much with accepting the rewards of his new life, would he? Remember, he actually tries to return the 2 piastres to Carmen early on. He pointedly refuses to take the smuggler's duro at the breach in the wall, insisting he won't accept smuggler's money. Even when he fights Garcia, he insists on using the martial techniques and the honor code after the fashion of my country, the Navarre style, explicitly rejecting the Andalusian methods. That shows his constant internal struggle, doesn't it, between his new criminal life and his old individual moral code. And maybe the greatest evidence of his incomplete assimilation is his atypical restraint, saving the English lord's life during that robbery, going directly against Garcia's instinct to just kill the Pejo. He remains a conflicted individual, really a failure of integration, not some perfect product of gypsy determinism.
What his very inability to integrate successfully is precisely what proves the cultural determinism. He is a payolo trying desperately to live by Kali's law, and the result is catastrophic internal and external conflict. He fails because the boundary is insurmountable. The tragedy is that he refuses to accept the determinism of his own cultural background while trying to force himself into one where he fundamentally doesn't belong. So ultimately, while the personal drama is undeniably intense, emotionally charged, the tragedy presented in the text feels structural to me. Jose attempts to cross this insurmountable cultural boundary into a life and a race, the gypsies, inherently defined by a different, often exploitative moral and social code that inherently views him as an outsider. The result was, tragically predictable right from the outset, as foretold by those gypsy proverbs and their explicit social separation from the payolo world. His fall is, I think, the inevitable result of trying to merge 2 worlds that the material itself establishes as fundamentally incompatible.
And I still believe that while incompatibility certainly provides the stage, the intense, the volatile, the deeply jealous nature of the protagonists themselves is the driving specific engine that actually executes the plot. Carmen's specific betrayals, the watch theft, the affair with Lucas, her ultimate defiant refusal to just stop loving Jose and live quietly, these are all acts of pure individual will, individual caprice that continually destabilize the action. The text, yes, it gives us both the deterministic framework and this chaotic action, but the action itself proves, for me at least, that personal passion, individual failure, and very specific choices, not just broad cultural dictates, determine the swift, violent outcome.
And that, I think, really highlights the lasting complexity of this work. It benefits profoundly from exploring exactly that tension, the tension between the generalized anthropological analysis laid out in Chapter 4, that deterministic framework, and the specific, passionate, chaotic narrative of the first 3 chapters. It's in exploring that tension that we can really try to understand the conflicting motivations that lead to human tragedy and ultimately failure.
Upon which we certainly agree. It is precisely in that tension between the sort of structural prophecy on one hand and the specific, fateful choice on the other that the story gains its profound depth. And there is certainly much more to explore in the depths of this really complex material.